This quick video is to review some of the ways that European aggressors went on the march in the 1930s, just before the outbreak of World War II. We start with a quick map that shows us where these aggressors are and where they were aggressive. The red dots on this map indicate the areas where there was military conflict, there was fighting in the years prior to World War II, and we're going to talk just a little bit about each of these places. We're going to start with Italy invading Ethiopia. Ethiopia is down here in Africa, and this country, this territory, was one of two territories to remain independent during the scramble for Africa in the 1880s. Back in the 1880s, Italy had attacked Ethiopia in an attempt to turn it into a colony, but the Ethiopians had successfully resisted the Italians in the 1880s, and this was a source of embarrassment for Italy. So in the 1920s and into the 30s, when Mussolini is in power in Italy and is trying to harken back to the Italian glory days, right, of the Roman Empire, Mussolini wishes to correct this record. So in 1935, Mussolini uses the new modern military to go back down to Ethiopia and attack them again in an attempt to force them into being a colony. The Ethiopians resisted, but the Ethiopians in 1935 were unable to match Italy's military strength. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, Italy had doubled down on their efforts to create a modern military. So when they arrived in Ethiopia in 1935, Italy brought with them their tanks, their upgraded machine guns, the poison gas, which had been created during World War I, and airplanes, which was a brand new technology. So the Ethiopians, while successful in the late 1800s, were not able to successfully defend themselves in 1935. The Ethiopians turned to the League of Nations for help, the League of Nations having been created after World War I to prevent war. Ethiopia went to the League of Nations and pleaded their case, asked for assistance. The League of Nations decided to not intervene. So that is one European aggressor on the march, Italy attacking Ethiopia. One of the second ways that European aggressors became aggressive was Hitler seizing power, rising to power in Germany, taking over in 1933, and immediately violating the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler worked to rebuild the German military, which had been dismantled. Oops, this is a picture, of Italy invading Ethiopia. Sorry about that. So, back to Hitler violating the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler is working to rebuild the German military, which had been dismantled after World War II, and in World War I. And in 1936, as you can see on this map, the Germans reoccupied an area called the Rhineland, which on this map is outlined with that bright pink outline. This was land that Germany had been forced to give up to France under the Treaty of Versailles, and Germany felt it had been unfairly taken from them. So in 1936, they reoccupy this territory. They take it back from France in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The fact that Germany has a military again is in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany is also sending some of its new military equipment as it remilitarizes to Spain. And Germany is getting involved in the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939 by sending tanks and planes and guns, upgraded military equipment, to support the fascist who is taking power in Spain, Francisco Franco. So Germany is violating the treaty by rearming themselves, by taking back territory that had been taken from it, and is expressing its, or let's see, not expressing, flexing its muscles, its military might, by throwing its weight behind a fascist takeover in another country. So meanwhile, while this is happening, Hitler is gaining popularity in Germany. Reemployment of Germans is on the rise. The military strength is on the rise. The pride that Germans feel for their country is on the rise. These things all make Hitler very popular. And the effects of the Great Depression, which they had been feeling in Germany for a decade, were resolving themselves, right? The burdens that Germans had been carrying for so long were beginning to be lessened. So Hitler is very popular. The Western countries, Britain and France in particular, also the United States, are watching what Hitler is doing in Germany. They don't like it, particularly France. If you remember back to the Treaty of Versailles and when it was being written, France is afraid of Germany, right? France wanted to make sure that Germany could never attack them again. And now France is watching as Germany is rebuilding its military and as Germany is reoccupying land on the French border that Germany is not supposed to be in. So France is very concerned. They are protesting loudly, but France is not strong enough to resist what is happening by themselves. Britain is not getting involved because, with a little hindsight, Britain is thinking perhaps the Treaty of Versailles had been too harsh, that maybe the Rhineland should have never been taken from Germany in the first place, that maybe taking Germany's military away in the first place had not been a good idea. So while Britain is a little uncomfortable with what they see happening, they're also unwilling to do anything about it. There are other reasons that the West did not respond to these aggressive actions, both in Ethiopia and in the Rhineland and in Spain. Many reasons why these countries in the West sought to keep the peace. First, France and Britain are both dealing with the Great Depression. So is the United States. The 1930s were a very difficult time for countries around the world. Political issues at home kept each of these countries focused on themselves. Second, as I've already told you, the British really did not have a strong desire to stop Hitler because some saw what he was doing as being okay because the Treaty of Versailles had been too harsh. It is also true that both Britain and France saw this new governmental structure called fascism as being better than communism. So in the 1930s, we see fascist leaders in Spain, in Germany, in Italy, rising to power and becoming stronger. But we also know that in the Soviet Union, communism has taken hold. And the West is very afraid of communism and what that means because it's just so opposite of capitalism and of democracy. So the Western countries are seeing fascism as a better alternative than communism. And in these struggling countries with high unemployment, communism is attractive to a large part of those populations in those countries. So if a fascist leader is rising to power, then that means we're avoiding communist takeovers in those countries. And the West sees that as a good thing. It is also true that these countries in the West have really clear memories of World War I, of the destruction and the death and the debt, right, of World War I. And they are not trying to repeat that experience. So while they don't like what Germany is doing, They don't like the takeover in Spain. They don't like Italian aggression in Europe or in Africa. Nobody wants to spark another world war. So there is a very great deal of hesitation on the side of the West in an effort to avoid another war. So all of this is happening in Europe, and the United States is staying neutral. The United States does not see any of what's happening in Europe as their problem. So the United States has no skin in this game. And then the final thing to talk about regarding these European aggressors and their activities is the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis. What happens is that in the face of what they see as weakness of the West, Germany, Italy, and Japan form an alliance, and they call themselves the Axis powers. Here is a picture of both Mussolini and Hitler inspecting the troops. A year later, they added Japan to their alliance, and then it became the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis. And these countries have banded together and they agree that they will not interfere with each other's territorial demands. Essentially, they're putting everybody on notice that each of them have territorial expansion in their minds and that none of them are going to interfere with what the other is doing. So that's the gist of the Rome, Berlin, Tokyo axis, which is signed in the late 1930s. What happens over here in Manchuria? So Japan is a part of those Axis powers. Japan is busy attacking China and an area, a region called Manchuria. And Japan is after natural resources, including iron and coal, in order to run their naval ships. So Japan is trying to militarize, but they need more natural resources to make that happen. And so they're going and attacking Manchuria in order to access those natural resources. So that's the aggression going on in the Pacific, right? We're not talking a ton about that right now because we're talking about European aggressors on the march. We're going to circle back to Japan in a couple of weeks. So we've talked about Italy attacking Ethiopia. We've talked about the Spanish Civil War and Hitler's involvement there. And we've talked about Hitler violating the Treaty of Versailles by rearming and by reoccupying a region called the Rhineland. And then finally, the Western countries attempting at all odds, with all ways, to keep the peace. Do not rock any boats in Europe because we do not want a repeat of World War II. All right, that's it for now. Thank you.